when you become perimenopausal and menopausal, you hit your second puberty.
That is the best term I've ever heard for it. This is Angry on the Inside. I'm Jess.
And I'm Jeannine. We're both certified ADHD life coaches, and so is our very first AOI guest, Louise Belshaw. But once again, this still isn't coaching.
It's not therapy or medical advice.
It's real, honest conversations about being women with late diagnosed ADHD and everything that goes along with it.
Take what resonates and leave the rest. Everything discussed in this episode is for educational and informational purposes only.
Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Louise Belshaw. In part 1, we talked about the girls who were missed, and today we're talking about what happens next, the grief, the self-discovery, and what it looks like to finally start understanding yourself years later.
One of the things that I asked at the end of my study was, is there anything that a teacher could have said to you that would have made a difference at that time? And the vast majority said, if they just pulled me to one side and said, is everything okay? What's going on? And we're going back to that curiosity. With the young people I coach, their faces light up when they speak about teachers that get it. Things like tone of voice, energy, circulating the room, not just standing there and asking, do you need help? Because that can be really jarring to admit that you need help. A lot of them are just fantastic teacher trainers in their own right. They should be the one training teachers. I'm just lucky enough to be in that situation where I can go, oh, amazing, right, I'm going to go and make, a post about that. I'm going to write a blog about that, put that in my newsletter. Like, I'm just like the most privileged coach in the world. The times when I've really struggled to make connection, and it's taken 8 weeks or 12 weeks before walls have come down. Sometimes I sit there and I'm like, oh God, I wish somebody could film this. It's just amazing, the impact that I can have. Whereas at the beginning, I'm like, oh, I don't know whether coaching's right for them. 12 weeks later, walls all come down and we're in this better situation. It is crazy.
It was interesting what you said about the woman going through puberty. It was like overnight she lost the interest in school and stopped trying. It sounds like to me what we would think of the typical teenager. By having a teacher pull someone aside and ask, hey, what's going on? Instead of just assuming, oh, this is typical teenage behavior. It's something's going on in their life. Either they're neurodivergent or their family life's not great or something's happening. It's not just because they're teenagers. It could be such a simple thing.
I've heard a lot of parents come to me curious about coaching and what it can do. One of the burning questions that nearly all of them have is that what part of it is them being a teenager and which part of it is neurodivergence? Well, that's $1 million question. They want answers. They want solutions. They want to support their child in the best way possible. I've coached parents who are getting it spot on, and I've coached some young people whose parents are not aligned in the best way to support the young person. Then it could be really tricky. Really tricky. There's a lot of frustrated parents who want them to be motivated to revise, to not be in the pain and the struggle that they find themselves in. There is no one size fits all. It's impossible to say how much of it is being a teenager and how much of it is neurodivergence, isn't it? It's impossible. But if we know about executive dysfunction and sensory difficulties, RSD, and if we educate ourselves as parents and as adults and carers, we can spot those differences. So
yeah,
I'm not a believer in here's a strategy. I don't go online and say, here's a bunch of strategies that you can use. The strategies are fantastic. And you can go online and have a strategy and try it and it works. But you know what? In my experience with a son and a daughter with ADHD, what works one week, the following week doesn't work. And then the parent is right bang, square one all over again. But understanding the triggers and what is ADHD and what is just being a typical teenager it's possible. But I think educating yourself about what ADHD and ADHD look like is the key.
We try to bring up that it's important for everybody to remember all those tips and tricks. They get boring after a while. If your kids find something that is working for them and then suddenly it's not, it's okay to encourage them to stop doing it and try something else. I think especially here in the States, it's a case that they put a lot of heavy expectations on productivity and not giving up on something when it's a case of Neurodiverse people take it literally. We will hang on to things and just grind them into the ground and think that we are failing because we started out so good and we were starting to make pace. It's important from the parental side to recognize in your kids. What I'd like to ask Louise, because I like to hear people's perspective of it, we talk about curiosity, but I don't think a lot of people understand what we're saying when we say curiosity. When you talk about staying curious, what would be your definition to those outside of our community to help them understand?
It's a really good question. And I know when we were being trained, that word curiosity was used every single session. I think we had that layman's version of what curiosity was. When you become a coach and you actually practice it, you realize it's a completely different thing. For me, it's about removing any kind of judgment, not being attached to any kind of outcome, not going with your own thoughts and feelings and your own agenda about what it is that you think might be going on for that person. It's completely and utterly neutral. Curiosity can go in any direction. It's not got a fixed path. And if it goes one way when you expected it to go another way, you're probably already too attached to the outcome. Curiosity is all of those things, but mainly it's about taking you and your ego completely out of it. And that is when it's the most impactful thing, because especially with young people, they're used to adults having an agenda or having a suspicion about why they're behaving in such a way. And even if they're neurodivergent friendly and they know all about it, there's still predictions that they might have in the back of the mind as to why the young person needs their help or needs their guidance or need their support. Don't need any of that. All you need to do is be curious. It takes practice though, doesn't it?
It does.
And it's hard as hell.
That is a wonderful way to explain it.
Even if you think you're all this about ADHD and you're going to help this kid, is if you're not curious, you're going to assume this is what's going on for you. Because I know what it's like when kids have ADHD. This is what they look like. Here, we'll help you this way. That might not work at all for that person.
The other thing that blows my mind with that is before I got into coaching full time, I didn't realize that autism and ADHD overlap so much. I think I've only coached one or two people who I've thought, ADHD presentation. Everybody else has been overlaps. And when I was an academic mentor in a college, there were some clients there who you could split them down the middle. They were like so 50-50 autism, ADHD. But the more I do this, the more I realize that it's such a spectrum. I know it's a cliche, but neurodivergence for me is neurodivergence. Like, I don't think I've ever come across anybody that's just one or the other. And I didn't realize that until I spoke to young people. So again, if I went with my own expectations about this student with ADHD, I'm going to miss everything else that's challenging for them. I didn't fully understand just how much sensory issues can impact young people. Because I don't feel like I have it now as an adult, but I didn't have it as a young person. I'm like really aware now of how jarring schools and colleges can be on a young person. There's so much noise. This is what partly contributed to my burnout. I would hide in my office in between lessons with the lights off. I put little fairy lights up. And I had to play music, some kind of ambient music on in the background. Where I'm at now is I'm thinking, right, so we hit puberty. We have an elevation. Some people have this elevation of sensory issues. Everything seems to be massively impacted. It's so much harder. And then we have all these hormonal fluctuations. Then they level out. We may be lucky enough to find ourselves in a career that suits us. I did. Teaching's the best job in the world if you're neurodivergent. It's always changing. There's bells to tell you when to move. There's deadlines which are fixable. But when I got to the end of my career and I'm hitting perimenopause, it's literally like I've come full circle and I'm back as a pubescent adolescent. It's crazy because sometimes I'll sit across clients and I'm really relating to everything that they're saying. If you take me out like 20 years ago and I'm talking to them, I'm like, oh, right, fair. But I literally feel that when you become perimenopausal and menopausal, you hit your second puberty and in some ways you regress and everything becomes hypersensitive again. I don't know whether you guys have felt that, but it's something that I'm feeling at the moment.
Most definitely. I love that you said second puberty because that is the best term I've ever heard for it. And it is. You hit that perimenopause, and I think that's that area where we all start to think we're going crazy. If you haven't been diagnosed, that's around that time where you usually start to experience the actual burnout. And you can see in women who are late diagnosed, we have very similar stories. We try to listen to ourselves and we do try to fix things without even realizing. Going into your office, you had dim lights, you were listening to sound, you were automatically doing the things that you knew worked with your sensory needs. You were at such an extreme that those things weren't really working the way they needed to. In those times, we start to learn a lot of us are high producing, high functioning women, and we hit those spots, and suddenly we learn those day or two sitting on the couch and doom scrolling, that doesn't work anymore for a reset. The nervous system has reached a point where, in my opinion, everything's on fire, but you don't feel anything until there's absolutely no other choice. It has to be white hot and flaming, and then suddenly everything just implodes. And if we do regress, I think we have to learn ourselves again in so many ways due to that drop in estrogen, which also ends up impacting our dopamine production. It is huge. What I'm curious about is that I believe very strongly that women in general don't have to be mothers to impact and be there for other women and young girls. What do you think is a way to show up for our younger generations, whether we have children or not? If it's our nieces or our cousins or young children in the neighborhood, what is a way that we can show up for them?
Big drive towards being diagnosed. As we get older, we become more aware. I think that growing awareness in society is fantastic. But my fear is that there's a whole host of young people coming up through the ranks who don't have a voice, and nothing's really changing for them. Like, we are old enough and ugly enough to make these changes ourselves and to advocate for ourselves. What concerns me is there isn't enough noise around young people in general who are struggling, undiagnosed, unaware of why they might be struggling. I think to show up for them means to be sensitive to the fact that things haven't changed for them. Just because we're more aware as a society doesn't mean that automatically things are being put in place for those young people further down the line, because they're not. There's a much more noise now around late diagnosed people than there is about the younger people coming up through the ranks. Naysayers will be saying, oh gosh, everything, we're over-diagnosing young people. I wish, hell no, there's nobody. There's the odd young person who's brave enough to make social media accounts. We know that it gains traction in the social media world to post little memes and GIFs and everything else, but true, meaningful advocacy, is that happening for young people? The training in schools needs to be consistent across the board. Expectations that every single teacher that gets trained currently will know about neurodivergence, how to accommodate them and support them in the classroom. That should be happening. Parents should be asking schools, you're telling me that my child is X, Y, and Z, they're getting into trouble, they're underperforming, you're doing all these things, but what do you know about neurodivergence? What does your school do to train all the teachers in how to support? Like, batting it back to the powers that be and saying, what are you doing? I've been in that situation where I've stormed into a headmaster's office parents' evening that's gone horribly wrong, where I've gone from one teacher to the next telling me that he'd do great if he was more focused, he'd do great if he would just behave himself, he would do great if he submitted his homework. And after hearing that from 9 separate individuals, I'm like, no. Stormed into the headmaster's office where he was having a meeting with the deputy head, and I sat down and said, what is your school doing? And I didn't do it aggressively. I was frustrated. As adults, we need to be careful not to just assume that because they're younger and because society is shifting, that they're necessarily getting the recognition and support, because they're not. We need to think about that and insist on continuity and consistency, education, wider training.
Is it the matter of the school still viewing ADHD as the person who can't sit still, who's not paying attention, who's disruptive, not looking at the girls who were being quiet, who seem spacey? For me, actually, when I went through puberty, it just made everything go more underneath. I never got in trouble. Just kind of kept to myself, tried to fit in, not draw too much attention. Very easy to look past that, you're being the nice, good student in the back of the class who's not causing any trouble. Meanwhile, you're struggling even harder to try to fit in. And it's not until we're women we can finally put words to what we were feeling all the time. Because I look back at myself as a teenager, I can see what was going on for me, but I don't think I had the vocabulary or the way to explain why I was feeling and how I was feeling. It was just this underlying, okay, I'm different, don't know why, but I'm going to try really hard not to be different, or at least not draw attention to me, because then people won't know that I'm different.
When I write about this in blogs and what have you, it usually gets a lot of interest. People saying, oh, I was the same. I masked. I was very quiet. I was a good girl. But in my coaching practice, I come across the opposite. I come across girls who are loud, impulsive, getting into trouble. I feel sometimes that they are labeled as being problematic and troublesome. And so it works in the other way. There are studies out there that talk about teacher bias, how they expect boys to behave in a certain way. But when a girl steps out of line, when she's drawing attention, when she's shouting out, that's willful. She can control that. If the phrase boys will be boys didn't sum it up, then I don't know what doesn't. It's two extremes. Yes, you've got your quiet maskers that don't get recognised. Then you've got the others who might drop out of school or be labelled as a problem. And they've got very similar issues. It's just different ends of the spectrum. They get missed too. That frustrates the life out of me is the fact that people complain about people getting diagnosed now. Oh, it's an epidemic. Over here, there's no gender breakdown. There's only a tiny amount of picture on it. Out of everybody that's going through a diagnosis, young women, the ages 21 and 27, something like that, they're the ones that have got through school. Maybe they've been on a waiting list. Maybe they get to this point where they can't advocate for themselves. So everyone's like, oh, everyone's getting diagnosed. Well, yeah, because they were missed in the first place. You can't blame them. There's no gender breakdown, and that's what drives me mad. As far as I'm concerned, it's a feminist issue. The fact we don't know. It is.
I was going to bring up modern feminism with our younger generations. It's an understanding of learning modern feminism and not emotional regulation, but more emotional understanding that we are allowed to get angry. We are allowed to be sad, to voice our opinions. I mean, that is some outdated rhetoric when any woman who steps up and says anything to the contrary that might be against the grain, she is a bitch. She's out of place. Those things are still very prominent everywhere in the world. Feminism is explained to men as to how it will benefit them. We shouldn't have to explain feminism in a way that men understand that it is beneficial to them for us to have a voice or to have autonomy or emotions and opinions. We should be raising a generation of men who also understand that, yes, they have full autonomy over their bodies. They have full autonomy over what they view and how they see. Therefore, yes, we should be equal. Correct?
Correct.
And that's something that we do not get. These young ladies are still seeing this weird, outdated perspective where we're supposed to be equal earners and we're supposed to be doing the housework, though, still. We're supposed to be raising the kids, but we're also supposed to have our own career. We're supposed to be intelligent and be able to speak with our husbands, speak with the men in our workplaces, but yet we're supposed to be able to adjust and hold the line and regulate them, which is just another spoon used up for the day, another way to give other people capacity while taking away from your own. That's important for girls to learn, co-regulating, say, a teacher in class, or they're learning to do that from their mothers and from their fathers. And I am not excluded from this group. I have done these things, but becoming more aware as an adult will allow you to be more open to your children. The thing that really irks me is some of the later generations that we have stating that, oh, well, if I was able to get through it, they can get through it. I dealt with that, so they can deal with that. That is such a fucking cop-out. We need to do better. We just need to do better. That is not right to look at younger generations and say, well, if I could go through it, then they can go through it. No. They can be strong enough to get through it, but you can teach them how to be strong and resilient without them having to deal with the levels of trauma that we all have dealt with as women.
In my experience, I've always had that from other women.
Yes.
Not men, but other women.
Yes.
That's the crazy thing. Surely if we've gone through these issues and struggled, that's when we reach out and send the life jacket. We don't go, oh, well, it'll be lovely. I'm going to watch you drown now because I did it. So now you can do it. And that's, I guess, what I was saying before about advocating as an older menopausal woman and being angry about not being diagnosed and to cope with all of that. That's huge. But let's not detract from the people who are voiceless, the younger generations who they live in just a different world, a completely different world. Being the mum to a 24-year-old daughter who was diagnosed at 21, I feel really sorry for them. I feel that scrolling and social media is just so difficult to navigate. Knowing your place in the world and knowing what is acceptable in relationships and what's not, harking back to what you said earlier about boundaries. It's so hard because I don't know whether you've noticed, but young people all look the same because they're scrolling. Everybody's got the same hairstyle. We're all wearing the same outfits. Because that fear of appearing different draws attention. That could go online or it could go face to face. Imagine that and being neurodivergent. Like, it's bad enough being hyper aware of everybody and everything around you and trying to fit in. But now you've got it everywhere, in your bedroom, on the toilet. It's literally everywhere. So yeah, I completely agree.
Had I been born into the newer generations where they did have the social media, I truly, truly would have struggled more than what I already had. These young ladies, you see yourself in them, but you also know as women, many times we have been taught and raised to bump heads against one another. The neurodiverse female community will say constantly, oh, I always got along better with men. Yes, you did. But there's reasonings behind that also, because there were other neurodiverse girls around you and you were probably pushing more against them at the end of the day than you were pulling them in and finding community. That's the way we were taught. That still remains. A lot of our girls are still high masking, trying to fit in because they think that's what they have to do to keep their heads above water. They don't realize there may be 2 or 3 people standing next to them doing the exact same thing because they can't believe that there's someone else going through it in the way that they are.
Yeah, so true. Friendships are difficult to navigate at the best of times. A couple of the women I interviewed handled it slightly differently. One person spoke about making sure that she was friends with everybody. She was a social butterfly and, like you said, got on with boys better than girls, but was just on the surface level friends with everybody. But girls had issues with that because it's like, well, hang on, where do you pledge your allegiance? Are you friends with us? Are you friends with them? You've got to pick. You've got to choose. So that's tricky. And then I have other women speak to me about almost falling head over heels for their next friend, like a major dopamine hit. Like, oh, love this person. I found my person. They get me. I get them, and it burns really bright, and then poof.
Yep.
I've been there myself. So it's like that where people eat the same meal over and over and over, and then all of a sudden realize, actually, I'm not really into this meal anymore. It's a similar thing, but yeah, friendship's definitely difficult to navigate. And in the case of my own daughter, she's still learning to recognize when she's dysregulated, and she's lost friendships because she's been highly dysregulated and hasn't nipped it in the bud, and the friends have been taught to in a certain way. And I get it. I understand what's going on. I raised her, so I know when she's dysregulated, but she's yet to identify that in herself and kind of put the right things in place to prevent it escalating. That's all self-awareness, and she's definitely improving.
Yes. That's the key of true self-awareness and understanding of our surroundings and our emotions and what's going on with our bodies, not trying to be what we think we should be, but truly learning to be who and what we are and feel comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Louise, talking to these women, especially those who were even later in life, did you see themes of what they felt the impact of going through school not knowing? Did you see any kind of similarities on who they were today or how they felt about it?
What you mean after they found out about
Yeah,
the diagnosis? Yeah, a lot of anger. One woman talked about emptying her mum's house when she died and going through all the school reports because her mum had kept them all, reading them and seeing all the signs were there, but also seeing the decline as well, because she was another woman who hit puberty and started to really become emotionally dysregulated and got into trouble a lot. Yes, a lot of grief, a lot of anger, mainly grief. It wasn't unusual for me to tear up listening to them because they were exhausted, being challenged every which way. It's that idea of this is what I could have been if I'd known, if I'd had the right kind of support. And the reports were just that little snapshot of what could have been before it declined. And also anger that nobody spotted it or bothered to inquire. One woman, she truanted heavily, and the school sent a truant officer round to her house. And she opened the door and said, "Oh yeah, I'm not well." And the truant officer went, "Oh, okay, well, never mind," and went back to school, and she never got in trouble for it. She was like, "I'm a teacher now. I wouldn't be okay with that." But back then, there was literally no safeguarding it. So there's all those feelings, being let down, kind of left, disregarded, but discarded. A couple of women spoke about that in great depth. The overriding theme was grief, sadness.
And I would assume too, still learning about themselves, about their ADHD, becoming more self-aware, doing all that, which would have been really nice to do when you were young. But now, as an adult, trying to undo the damage that was done, being able to change your thought process, especially if you're getting in trouble in school all the time, all you know is that you're bad, you misbehave, you don't try hard enough, you're not disciplined enough. And how do you working through all of that so you can move forward, not carrying all that baggage, which I don't know. Do we ever get rid of the baggage?
Mm, I don't know. I think their journeys carried on, didn't they? I wonder if I was to interview them now, further down the line, with a diagnosis, maybe medicated. Some of the baggage that we carry is there for a reason, and we learn about ourselves. We learn from the mistakes that we make. It's interesting to hear that a lot of the young women that I speak to, and some of the women from the study, went on into teaching and the caring profession or working with young children. I don't know what you think, but I think it's that emotional intelligence. I would say the vast majority of young women that I coach want to go into nursing, want to become doctors, want to go into teaching, working with young people, want to make a change, make a difference. I find that quite curious that they're all driven by that.
Being empathetic, tend to be more empathetic. I see it as a way of you can kind of right the wrongs. I want to be that person that if I had had them when I was younger, life would have turned out different. How can I extend that? And I just know before my daughter was diagnosed and before I was diagnosed, recognizing so much of myself in her and feeling like I could parent her so much better than my parents could because I didn't necessarily understand it, what was going on for her, but I recognized it.
Yeah. Yeah. When parents come to me wanting coaching for their children, they always say the same thing, which is, "I've probably got it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've got it, but this is about them." So they'll throw themselves on the sacrificial pyre rather than... I mean, that's just typical, isn't it? That empathy, that knowing. It's like, no, fix them. I'm all right for now. And
It's too late to save me, I'll save them.
yeah.
Some of those things come from the choices we make with careers, at least for me, the want and need to try to keep others safe. I feel safe a lot when I was young in a lot of situations. I always leaned towards trying to keep other people safe. I could be very quiet and small, like in a classroom, but if someone else was being discriminated or they were being bullied, it took nothing for me to stand up and puff up and get in front of that person to try to make sure that they were safe. I'm not like some super brave person or anything like that. Even if I was terrified, if it meant someone else was potentially going to be hurt, or I was the one trying to run and get in between it.
Mhm. And do you think that that was a form of justice sensitivity and your experiences?
I do. I think that it is a justice sensitivity. I think that it also comes down to the fact that we tend to keep ourselves secondary in our brain rather than primary. And so it is much easier for me to see injustice and say that person has a primary need and they need to be protected and they need to be kept safe. I can step into that space because it gives me that dopamine. Outside of being people pleasers, a lot of times we try to be people savers and it fries us out. When you were talking about the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, when we look back after diagnosis and we're seeing and getting upset about the fact that so many people miss so many signs. How did people not see this? I'd seen a little quip online and I wish I knew where it was from. I can't find it. It was talking about something similar. And it was like, how do we step outside the multiverse? Because that's what it is. We all create this multiverse in our mind, all these different ways and different paths of things that could have been. And for as much as people say we only have two forms of time, right now and not now,
Yeah.
we can live in our heads and we can sit and build out these entire worlds that could have been. And it makes us so upset and so sad. And it takes a long time, if ever, to get out of those fake memories, to get out of those after the fact, hindsight 2020 lives that we think would have happened.
Yeah, it's difficult to move forward. It is. Yeah. The whole justice sensitivity and RSD combination is really clearly obvious to me in a young person. It's really difficult to unravel and untangle for people who don't get that. A lot of the time, it's emotional dysregulation, RSD, justice sensitivity, and a lack of dopamine. That is a interesting combination in a school setting where it feels unjust. You feel judged. You're trying your hardest. You're still not getting any positive attention. People around you are getting treated differently. It's a lot. When I was teaching properly, giving a young person that space to emotionally regulate between lessons was really important. I'd have students come in and they would ping pong around the room, clearly dysregulated because they've sat for an hour in an exam and they've got another hour of English. They'll ping pong. I used to call it tactical ignoring. That is a term that's still like bandied around in schools. In neurodiversity, tactical ignoring is really important to just give them that chance, because if you don't give them that time, you'll find yourself in a combative situation. They will then feel justice sensitivity kick in because it's like, I've not done anything. And then the teacher will continue with it, and then it becomes rejection sensitivity. This plays 3 or 4 times a day, God knows how many times a week, then managed moves and suspensions. Doesn't have to be like this. Meanwhile, the self-esteem is in the shoes. So we're going back to before what we were saying about when is it just being a teenager and when is it something else? When you've got that combination, it upsets me. It really upsets me because honestly, connections that you can make just by giving them space and time and curiosity is huge. I've worked with young people who've literally told me to F off almost from the get-go. And I've just kind of been there anyway and not rejected them. Maybe I've distracted them from this, that, and the other. Then we've gone back onto what we were working on. They've regulated themselves. But more importantly, they've realised that I've not given up, that connection's been made. Somebody said to me the other day, it was a young man who actually wasn't right for coaching. And this is the interesting thing working in school. Like, you never know what you're going to get, who you're going to get through the door. He was quite deeply troubled. He literally looked at me and said, "You're my people." And I went, "Sorry?" He goes, "You're my people." And then he goes, "Do you know what that means?" And I didn't know what to say. And I just said, "That you trust me?" He goes, "No, you're part of the family now." Because I'd not judged him, I'd been curious, I'd kind of stood my ground when he was trying to be aggressive. And he was like, "Oh no, now you're one of the family." I didn't know how to respond to that at all. My point is, to advocate for young people means to understand them. To understand them means to give them the space to do that and not be judged. Space, time, compassion. This is why those women would be so good at being teachers with young children, because they get it. Like, they've got the empathy. They understand what works and what doesn't.
Louise, I wanted to ask, and this is slightly off topic, but popped into my head. Do you see much imposter syndrome? Is that something that is affecting the younger generations, or is it something that's kind of petered out some?
I have issues with the term imposter syndrome. I genuinely do. Like, I don't really understand it. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. Can you give me an example?
Yes, I had read a book called Move the Needle, which it is about crafticism, activism by using different types of craft, fiber arts, that type of thing. In it, she was discussing how we identify. There are so many people who do and are activist, but they don't consider themselves activist. They think an activist is supposed to be leading the charge, organizing all these things, doing all these things. All they're doing is going and participating. Therefore, they don't feel themselves as an activist, and that is not how they describe themselves when they're out and about in their life, because they think they need to be more to be seen as that. And that's how I look at imposter syndrome, that we have this idea that we are never enough, never at a level of understanding, education, blah, 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 that we think we cannot describe ourselves or label ourselves in different ways without being looked down upon. It's almost like a worry of being shamed by others. You're not that, you're not good enough. That's how I look at imposter syndrome. The book sort of sparked it in my mind where I was like, that is so interesting that really that's what it comes down to, is us being comfortable to identify. And she was talking about, can you imagine what type of world we would live in and how different things would be if people who were actually activists identified as activists? It's still a case of it can spread out in any direction. People who actually love dogs. I'm a dog lover. People are comfortable saying that. I'm a dog lover. We all know what it is. And then you can band with each other. I am this, I am that. And our younger generations, I feel like they are far more confident in a lot of ways than we used to be, more self-assured or self-aware. But I wondered, is that still underlying where they're not identifying themselves as being, oh, I'm great at this, I'm a that, because they feel they aren't reaching those levels.
No, yeah, there's loads. Nearly every single coachee that I've met has imposter syndrome then, if that's the definition. The overriding opinion that they have of themselves is, I'm lazy, I can't do it, I can't do what other people do, constantly comparing themselves to others and what they're not capable of. They miss all the good things that they bring to the table. I've coached people who are getting A grades. They're putting the work in, but they're still getting A grades relatively effortlessly, and that's with everything that's going on. And they still aren't happy about the A minus. They want the A star. It's not good enough for them. So the standards are impossibly high, but they never give themselves grace. They never go, this is why I struggle with that. And that's the beauty of coaching, isn't it? They can spin all these narratives, and they might think, I want to get better at motivating myself to revise. Once you unpick it and realize what's going on for them is a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-belief, a hardcore belief that they can't do it even if they were given all the hours in the world. If you unpack it, turns out they're fully capable. What they've got to do is shift the mindset and accept what they can change. It's that old adage, isn't it? Like, what can they change and what do they have to live with? But for me, it's a different way of working, isn't it? It's like they look at what's happening around them and go, well, that person's been in the library for 7 hours, revising continually. That's not what works for them. Like, it might be that they do half an hour, reward themselves, have a 10-minute break, go back, do another half hour. Like, you've got to work with the brain. You've got to figure out what works for them. So I don't really get that many students. Like, some will be like, oh, I'm a great runner, I'm a great dancer. They'll admit that. But when it comes to academics, I don't think I've met one. The most interesting student I met, and I loved her. She was your typical naughty girl. I'm sure the school when she left were like, she would be like yourself. She'd take people to task. Like, why do we have to wear tights in the winter and the boys get to wear shorts? And she'd pull teachers up on things that they said. Like, she was a major activist, very sparky, really liked her spirit. I think she was struggling with PMDD, and she had the lowest self-esteem ever. She ended up in one of the top 20 colleges in the country because her teachers thought she would fail everything, and her results were top grades. She didn't do homework. She barely did classwork. She answered back all the time. She was busy making dens in a corner of English, and she came out with A grades across the board, and the school could not believe it. She then went to this college where I was working, and I was like, I had to persuade the teachers that she was very bright and just give her a chance because she doesn't learn like everybody else does, because her listening was out of this world. She was so perceptive. I can't begin to tell you that the skills that she had that would not be seen as traditional academic skills were just out of this world. And she always doodled. She was listening to everything that was going down. She knew each teacher inside and out. She could read a person from 50 miles away. She knew exactly what that person was thinking. She was accurate to a T, and she ended up with very high grades. But the assumption was she's a naughty girl. She doesn't listen. She never writes anything down. She doesn't do her homework or coursework. And then I saw the underbelly, the anxiety around going in exams, the lack of belief. I saw her struggling with all the challenges that higher education or further education was bringing, and that all the things that she relied on in school, as maladaptive as they were not working in this environment. But she got through it, and it was amazing. I think imposter syndrome, she'd be a good candidate for that, 100%. She wanted to go and work with young people, and her words were to give them what I never got. It's funny, isn't it?
Louise, do you have anything burning in your brain that you would like to get out there into the world?
I think I've covered a lot of ground. I'm happy. I don't think there's anything. No, I think I'll walk away. You know, when you like overanalyze something, I'm trying very hard not to do that. Not to walk to walk away from a podcast or anything really and go, But I don't think I'm going to walk away and start going through things with this one. I feel like we've done good.
I've got one thing to ask, and this is just me, and probably me being overly American. So keep that in mind for me, Louise. I'm sure you've heard of Youngblood, the singer guy, right? And
Yeah.
I know he's starting to spread it out into his regular concerts, but he does that annual concert every year. He has the mental health tent and the Make a Friend tent and stuff like that. Do you hear that from any of the kids? Because seems to, at least online, be very pro mental health, stuff like that. He talks about it very openly.
That's really interesting because he's more popular and famous over there than he is here.
I've never heard of the guy.
Do you know about him because he was being interviewed on a podcast? Do you know when a podcast ends and then the next guest comes on, and I was just doing something and listening?
Yeah.
And I didn't know him either, but I really, really liked him. Like emotionally intelligent and smart. And I was like, I was quite inspired by him, actually.
He's like that in a lot of his interviews. And my daughter really liked him. We actually ended up both liking him and his music, because he did some stuff with Ozzy Osbourne before he passed. He was doing a few things with them, and they made some cameos in his videos and stuff, tongue-in-cheek type things. But he's just very, very open about mental health. But he does the mental health tents at the big festival he does every year in England. And it's basically like almost a nonprofit, so that they can get the young people out. And I had a suspicion that maybe he was probably more popular here.
He got his big break over there. Yeah. But there's another guy you probably won't have heard of. He was a rapper kind of in his heyday, probably about 10, 12 years ago. And his stage name is Professor Green. And he was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, I think. Definitely autism, not so sure about the ADHD. He is incredibly intelligent. He talks about men and toxic masculinity and what it's like to have autism. But he's just fabulous with words. As you can imagine, that was his profession. But if you can watch him in any interviews, he's your guy because he's just not afraid to tell it like it is. And I really listen to some of his podcasts, and I've gone, wow, he's amazing. You get really hyped up and excited by what somebody's got to say. He's fantastic. So worth a listen.
Louise, thank you so much for joining Jeannine and I. We are so excited to just see you on such a trajectory in helping young women in ADHD, all of the younger generations, and the impact that you're making. I truly believe that you will end up being a juggernaut in this space. I think that you are an impressive, amazing individual. And I love your perspectives and your ideas and the way that you view all of these children and these young adults through a lens that is just so considerate and curious and open.
Oh, thank you very much.
Could not agree more.
Thank you for having me on. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
These girls that Louise has so expressly brought to the forefront are still out there. Some of them are sitting in a classroom right now, and others might be raising their families. Some of them, they're actually sitting here listening to this podcast. If this conversation made you think about a young person who needs more understanding and fewer assumptions, send this episode their way.
Until next time, remember, you're not alone, and you aren't the only one who's angry on the inside.